This week has left little doubt about the course of our country. President Trump was impeached for the second time. Resolutions were introduced to expel and censure Republican representatives that questioned election results. Joe Biden introduced a coronavirus recovery plan that was filled with socialist dreams. Amid all the things that happened, we see some drastic issues on the right. We must start the search for real conservatives. This is the Closet Conservative Podcast. For the second time in just over 1 year, President Donald Trump was impeached by Democrats. And I say by Democrats because it was a mostly partisan vote. There were 10 Republicans that did side with the Democrats. We'll talk about that more in a moment. He was charged with inciting insurrection, which is a stretch given that the statements he made have been said in similar fashion by Democrats before. We've heard these statements at football games. We've heard them from coaches. We've heard them from teachers. We've heard them from people that are trying to motivate others all throughout our lives. Yet, because Donald Trump said those things, he was inciting insurrection. Now, I'm certainly not saying Donald Trump is perfect. I have never once in my time of talking on my show or in my writings, I've never once said Donald Trump is perfect. He does say things that I don't agree with. But in this situation, he was not inciting insurrection as they've tried to claim. There's a lot more to this story. Still, Democrats, they unanimously voted to impeach President Trump, and this time they convicted 10 Republicans to impeach him as well. There are a lot of questions as to what will happen in the Senate. The Senate has already said they will not take up the trial until after Trump leaves office. And it's really not entirely clear that they can constitutionally impeach him once he is out of office anyway. But since when have the Democrats really cared about the Constitution or the rules? I have not heard one single Republican come out and say that they were glad the violence happened at the Capitol. They've all spoken out and they've condemned it, as did President Trump. But that does not satisfy the left. Representative Cori Bush introduced a resolution to try and expel anyone who challenged the election results, just even questioned them at all, because she said that they contributed to the violence through their actions. By expelling these people, the Democrats would be overturning the election of the people of the various districts across the country. In other words, Democrats would be doing the very thing that they said President Trump was trying to do. They said he was trying to overturn the will of the people by overturning the election results. But they're willing to expel someone that questioned the validity of an election. This has not stopped the Democrats, as they're going to continue to try and remove conservatives from society. They've allowed big tech to censor conservatives, removing the ability for them to communicate and share their ideas. Not one Democrat spoke out against the censorship of President Trump and his supporters that have been kicked off of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Amazon, Apple, Google, and more. Silencing any opposition is certainly important in socialism, and the Democrats are well on their way to establishing a socialist society with their puppet president, Joe Biden. He was more than happy to cater to them with his new coronavirus recovery plan that he introduced this week. It was filled with major spending. It was more money to Americans, but in the middle of all this, the plan involving coronavirus testing, talking about vaccine distribution, local government aid, housing assistance, all the things that we knew were going to be there, he pandered to the socialists by proposing raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. That's been one of their big pushes for quite some time. He said that this bill was just the first of two that he would introduce. You see, this is a scary time in our country, and we're staring down the barrel of a socialist society. And we really don't have much to protect us. You see, the way our government is set up, our representatives are supposed to represent the will of the people. And there's really nothing we can do as long as the Democrats have full control. The socialists will have their way. You see, we as conservatives trusted our elected representatives to stand and to do what's right. Our elected representatives are the ones that we should be trusting to stand against these things. But instead, we are left searching for real conservatives. You see, one thing you do not see on the left, and while Democrats have a lot of problems, I do not agree with all of their policy. One thing you do not see on the left, they do not waver from their stance. They do not waver from their positions and what they believe in. While I don't agree with what they believe in, the tenets of big government, socialism, pandering to social justice causes, they stand behind those issues. But for those on the right, we have become accustomed to representatives that waver, flip-flop, and cater to their big donors in an effort to save their careers in Washington. As the impeachment process took place, 10 Republicans proved they were no longer concerned with conservative values or conservative ideals. They are only concerned with public perception. You see, most conservatives would agree that it is important to have election security. Now, not all conservatives agreed that there was election fraud in this election. I'm not arguing that point. There was some big division in that, but most Trump supporters did agree that there were some concerns with election fraud. But all conservatives should agree to the fact that we need election security, and if there's questions about the validity of a vote, that we investigate that. And that's what many were stepping up calling for. But instead, these 10 Republicans said no. They no longer believe in fighting for the causes that the conservative base believes in. They believe it's simply okay that when you face opposition, you run from it. You face the cries of racism, the cries of catering to an insurrection that was not an insurrection. As we learn more and more, we're learning this was so much more than just a few Trump supporters that were extremists. I'm not going to deal with that, but we're learning that these Republicans, they no longer stand for what they believe in. They're willing to cave and cater to those that give them opposition. And we continue to hear that many Republicans in the Senate say they would vote to convict President Trump or consider voting to convict President Trump if the trial came to the Senate as well. One particular that comes to mind is Mitch McConnell. He's trying to hide behind cryptic statements, but those statements tell us everything we need to know. Conservatives are now on the search for real conservative representatives. Those that will stand up for what the conservative base believes in and stand for what's right. No matter how mad and upsetting it is to the Democrats and the mainstream media, these conservatives should stand for what they believe in and what their base is pushing for, those missions of conservatism. The days of tolerating, pandering, and wavering among those that claim to be conservative are over. If we say we believe in something like small government, fair elections, the Constitution, and decreased regulations, among many other things that we claim to believe in, then we should stand behind those things no matter what. Just because of public pressure and Democrat pressures to potentially end a political career, that is no reason to abandon the people you represent and the values that you claim to hold. The search is on for real conservatives in Congress. If you enjoyed this show, be sure to check out our other podcast, The Jared Dyson Show, that airs multiple times each week. You can find the show on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you like to listen to podcasts. Be sure to go search for it and click subscribe to make sure you receive great conservative content. We'll talk to you next week. The Closet Conservative Podcast is a production of The Liberty Loft. Copyright The Liberty Loft 2021. You can find more shows and information on our website, www.thelibertyloft.com, or on any of our social media channels. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with your friends.